we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. Welcome to the show. If it's your first time listening, please give us a like and subscribe if you like what you hear. Tell your friends. You know, we always like to say, if you tell one friend, our podcast can double overnight. So everyone tell your friends about us. Rate the podcast. Again, subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell if you're watching on YouTube. We always like to hear from everyone. So again, you can always message us on Instagram at the Bigmark Pod or Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast. And you can also support the podcast. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/thebigmarkpodcast. We have different extra levels there and all kinds of different ways to support the podcast. Today, I sat down and I was thinking, I want to kind of just shoot the shit with you guys today. You know, I've done kind of one of these before and just kind of talked with you and see how everyone was doing. And, it's always funny because obviously it's just me here. So, I mean, it's more kind of, getting some of my thoughts out. And, I never really thought I could ever do, this kind of style of podcast. And, shout out to some of the greats, Theo Vaughn and Bill Burr out there that have solo podcasts that do their own thing and monologue. And I'm sure sometimes they show up prepared, and I'm sure they have things written down and things like that. But, when I do these, again, I've talked about being accountable, and, the Sober October I've been doing, quote unquote, has been great. As I have my little drink here. But, there's so many things going on. It's a really interesting time. I just came back from a big meeting today at work, and, working in the craft beer industry, we obviously have a really close tie to kind of what's happening in the restaurant industry. And we see like the major crazy staff shortages there. We're feeling it ourselves at the brewery. And, I don't know if it's just our atmosphere or, we're kind of like doing a minor pivot in some of our like goals as a company. And generally speaking, there's kind of like a weird vibe. And again, I don't know if it's just this transitional period. Again, it's fall. We're entering another time of that's like generally uncertain at any time, let alone during a global pandemic. Obviously, last fall wasn't really hot. Wasn't great for COVID. So like shit was shutting down. We were going into heavy lockdowns come last year. So again, obviously the difference is here we have vaccines and all kinds of different stuff like that. But I feel at the end of the day, a lot of people are just kind of fed up with it. There's a lot of people that you kind of consider, real serious rule followers. And, they're the ones that are kind of starting to go, listen, I'm kind of sick of all these weird rules where, numbers aren't really going crazy right now. Hospitals aren't inundated. Why are there still so many mandates? Why is there still all this stuff? Like, again, you talk about, or I mentioned the restaurant industry. Like, I'm out there trying to talk to these managers, and, they end up telling me like they barely even have any staff. Like, shout out my buddy Jared McCrory. Him and his family are basically running their business right now. They have a bar in Burlington. Shout out Bar Culicino, awesome place, great Italian kind of craft beer lounge, and they're actually importing this really like great Italian craft line up, just all types of different beers. Anyway, it's basically my buddy Jer, his dad and his sister are like are working hard, like doing everything. They have a couple other servers, I think. They had 3 people in the kitchen. One guy quit. Again, basically with this Serb, with for all our international listeners, the Canadian pandemic kind of support is called Serb, or the acronym is Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit. Anyway, obviously it's like pretty good. I think it's like over $2,000 a month. And a lot of these people who were working in this industry weren't necessarily making that much money. So it's really hard, for them to kind of justify going out, working in these conditions that are, shall I say, other. Now they're starting to open up full capacities here in Ontario, and it's could be potentially an issue because now we have even less servers and there's going to be more people coming in. What exactly is that going to actually turn into? Will places just keep their capacities limited for a while until they start getting people back? But again, when it's easier to stay at home instead of working, obviously people are going to stay at home. So I think at this point we've essentially reached the tipping point, or the point of diminishing returns with this benefit program. Again, there's still obviously welfare. There's still those people who are seriously in need and need help. There's still social programming for that. But again, I think we need to start getting at least that. I mean, I'm biased because again, I'm adjacent, if not part of that whole restaurant industry thing, with my day job kind of thing. But that being said, we need kind of to get the economy back going. But again, there's still this weird vibe, and I don't know if it's because Mercury's in Gatorade or whatever, and all things are weird, vibey, fucking planetary motions. And that's an interesting thing, with all that stuff. Mercury in retrograde, obviously I'm just joking, but with the Gatorade. But, it's interesting with that, I read, it's hard with this meme culture too. I read this little meme the other day that said basically astrology was created, like horoscopes, like in the newspaper, were created by like a British newspaper company to like help sell newspapers. And it's interesting that, there's kind of like a pseudoscience that kind of surrounds, astrology and stuff like that. And, obviously the basis of it being like the time of year you're born, the dates of your birthday basically coincide with like general personality traits, which generally speaking, psychology wise, is kind of like basically a crock of shit. Who knows? People are born all types of years. You can't fucking say shit. I could probably blank out every single horoscope and just switch them all around and you'd never know the difference. There's confirmation bias issues. There's all kinds of just like it's a psychological soup. But I always do think about it though. If I give it a chance, maybe there is something, because obviously as our planet is rotating through the solar system, certain times of year we can kind of predict where things are going to be. And maybe, and I think astrology, like really serious astrology, really takes into account like the year you were born and the time and like all that stuff too. So that's a whole other thing. But, maybe there's some merit to that because, these planets are obviously millions, hundreds of thousands of light years away in our solar system. But like, who knows exactly what kind of, solar rays we're floating through, magnetic different systems and things. And like, if again, a planet in a certain part of the solar system means something, maybe it's not necessarily the planet. It's just the fact that the planet is in that part of our solar system, which is essentially like a giant clock that's saying that maybe at this region of space we're traveling like through some weirdo vibes. Again, this is a weird combination of kind of spirituality, I guess you could call it, and like science, which is interesting. I mean, I talk a lot about, it's like I enjoy, one of my favorite books is Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. And one of the characters in it is this priest who's also a physicist, a nuclear physicist. And his whole thing, and Dan Brown describes in the novel too, like his office was full of different, science, not textbooks and stuff like that, and also like religious iconography. And obviously being raised in a Catholic school and a Catholic atmosphere, and going through all the sacraments and shit, like, that stuff kind of surrounded my life. So I'm interested in it. I know what I know about it. I don't know everything, obviously, but I know what I've learned, and it is fascinating because, again, you talk about science and spirituality, history and religion, real events and myth kind of conjoining, that's all in biblical myths and all that kind of stuff. And I truly believe that religion and science are kind of both telling the same stories at the same time. I think they're two sides of the same coin. I think they're just using different language, and there is a kind of, what do you call that, when asymptote or whatever, when you can almost approach zero, but you can never actually cross that line. There's always that point where they don't ever actually touch, and that little gap is like the leap of faith. And it's interesting because there is an aspect of science that requires, like, I guess, faith in that way, or trust. Let's put it that way. There's an aspect of trust with science where you have all these scientists, obviously a part of this giant community, global community of scientists. You're trusting them that they're reviewing these journals and that they're doing these experiments in complete earnest, and they're doing it honestly, and they're doing it not necessarily for money. Now, that's not necessarily the case. We all know that in reality, there's lobbyists, there's companies that give grants to these scientists to run studies about certain things. And, to this date, there's been a lot of studies that have come out that have kind of been tampered with, or at least nitpicked. A lot of studies are just meta-analysis where they're just picking and cherry picking all these experiments that have already been done with potentially questionable methods. And, but at the same time, there are lots of scientists that have integrity. There's, again, it's I guess like artistic integrity, right? You have this scientific integrity where you want to find the truth for certain things. You're not just going to put out bullshit just to make $1. In fact, not a lot of these scientists are making a lot of money. So in fact, their research is their life. So, but there is that trust we still put in these men and women and folks that do all this science. But they also have their flaws, right? And so does obviously religion, organized religion in that sense. And I think one of the biggest things, big eye-opening moment, big kind of just, I don't know, just kind of like, I wouldn't call it an epiphany, but just like kind of putting two and two together and just really opening my mind. I took a couple courses, specifically one called Drugs and Behavior in University out at Western. Shout out Western, go Stanks, go. And it was basically went through, honestly, about every type of drug essentially you can come up with: caffeine, tobacco, MDMA, psilocybin, other kind of like obscure party drugs, like nitrous oxide stuff, like honestly, like everything. I felt like, obviously there's all kinds of derivatives and research chemicals and stuff like that are kind of like just gonna work on the same kind of pathway, but essentially we went through all these different, it was kind of broken up into how your body actually deals with the drug. So there's different neurotransmitters in your body, obviously. Norepinephrine, acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, obviously everyone all knows those ones. And a lot of drugs work on those neurotransmitters, and they're either like dopaminergic agonists, which means they excite the dopaminergic system, and then antagonists for everything. Serotonin, serotonergic antagonist, let's say, whatever. There's these categories of drugs, and they basically work on how they work in the body. And some drugs are coming in and they're mimicking the exact same shape, of a molecule. I guess, for instance, psilocybin looks a lot like serotonin, and it comes in and it will bind right to the receptor, just like as if it was serotonin. So it acts the same way and it has the same effects as serotonin in the body. There are also other drugs that just make your body produce more of that chemical. There are other drugs that prevent your body from making that chemical. There's another things that it's called reuptake inhibitors. So essentially your synaptic cleft, so the two different synapses in your body, neurons, when they meet, the synapse is the little space in between. So essentially the way your neurons actually talk to each other is one floats these little chemicals over to the other neuron, and the other neuron and the other chemicals either bond to the neuron, then they're uptaken by blah, blah, and it keeps on going down the chain. So reuptake inhibitor, when there's all these molecules kind of floating around in this synaptic cleft, this little space in between the synapse, or that doesn't make sense, in between the neurons, when there's all these neurochemicals kind of floating around, what happens is sometimes that one neuron will reuptake, so it'll reabsorb some of those neurotransmitters to keep using them. So it kind of saves your body a little bit of time instead of actually manufacturing said neuron. So essentially that just keeps things pumping a little bit more. But the reuptake inhibitor, what happens is it doesn't allow those kind of free neurotransmitters to be floating around to be reuptaken as much. So they just kind of like float off into your bloodstream, I guess. But anyway, so that has many effects. Again, all these different drugs, and that's basically a really probably overcomplicated analysis or description of kind of how drugs work. But again, that's how all these drugs were taken, and it really kind of, and maybe it was how the professor kind of taught it, but it really, how do I put this? It really what do I want to say here? Anyway, it just kind of took the wind out of the sails of a lot of these drugs that seem so crazy and seem so daunting, and I had no idea how they were really working in the body. At this point in school, I'd done physiology and things like that. I really knew how the body worked normally. I didn't really understand the actual processes that some of this drug, if it was a blood flow thing, and who knows, right? But again, this course was really eye-opening, really informative about a lot of this stuff. And again, it just kind of reduced that whole kind of stigma. Anyway, it was just so informative, and I felt like I knew what these drugs were doing, that when I eventually did try, it's hard to say. I think I had, at this point for sure, I had tried psilocybin before this class. But again, just understanding how that worked, it was really eye-opening to me, as far as again, just feeling comfortable with it and knowing that, there's dosages, there's, You can overdose on certain drugs. Psilocybin, for instance, is a very safe drug. It's really, really hard to overdose on these drugs. But again, there is a dose curve no matter what. It eventually goes away, which is, again, one of the biggest issues with psychedelics is that people do get it's so foreign and such a wild experience that people kind of get caught up, especially in the time dilation thing. So essentially time dilation, which I've probably mentioned before on the show, but time dilation is essentially making time feel like it's much longer than it is, or much shorter. Again, it's just kind of like expanding and contracting time. So a lot of people who are kind of freaking out, as they say, on drugs, on psychedelics, they don't really understand that it's not going to last forever. And sometimes they don't have a person there that's going to tell them that. Sometimes the other person they're with are on the same drugs as they are, so they're freaking out equally. But whether you have that thought internally or whether you have someone there to kind of tell you, you kind of need someone there to be like, this isn't going to last forever, essentially. And again, that course just kind of embedded in my mind that, again, these drugs have an effect on our brain through physiological processes. There's not too many things that we don't understand, even though apparently we didn't understand general anesthetic until like last year. So like we were just knocking people out like with a hope and a prayer, hoping they'd come back. We just kind of knew that if you gave them this combination of drugs, people would fucking KO with no pain usually. Anyway, so like I said, most of these drugs the mechanism is understood, and this course was really informative of it, and it really gave me that whole kind of like more of a comfortable feeling with doing these drugs. And again, I feel like not a lot of people get that kind of experience too, or understand that, know that. And it's kind of one of those things where, again, there's this psychedelics specifically, there's a lot of spirituality that does surround the use of psychedelics. There's dates back through history, through time, even, just any culture. I think any culture, but some tribes like in Nunavut, because they don't have like natural plants growing, have used some type of mind altering chemical or plant. And there's something to that. And I think it's really special that, you can have like, it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg kind of situation that, you look back at the stoned ape theory. Did what came first? Did God come first, or did psychedelics come first? Essentially, did we eat mushrooms and then discover God, or did we already have the idea of God and then mushrooms kind of like brought us closer to that? Who knows? Maybe we'll answer that question another day. But again, there is that spiritual link to some of these psychedelics. But like I mentioned in this course, it kind of took it apart and took it into a more scientific, not an analytical approach. And, again, that kind of eased my worries about things, but it is a little bit sterile. It is a little bit kind of like, you're not really necessarily connected to the drug. Essentially, this course is being taught that you're going to study either humans or human analogs on these drugs. So it's all this information for you as a researcher to know when you give person this drug, they're probably going to act this way. It's not going to be like, super surprising. But that being said, it kind of separated things. But you can look at drugs that way, psychedelics that way. Again, look at acid. It's very chemically derived, but it has these effects. And again, I think, even research chemicals out there, all these different psychedelics that exist, You can approach it in a very spiritual, religious way. You can also approach it in a very analytical and scientific way. You know, and I've mentioned, you know, talking about psychedelic therapy before getting in, you know, going to school essentially, and trying to hone my craft a little bit in that way. And, you know, I mentioned in the Music Saga podcast, if you haven't listened to that, go check that one out. I mentioned, you know, not really knowing what was going on music wise. Shout out John Harley again. Love you, brother. We're going to be doing some little folk jammies. You know, shout out Luke and Adam and Ty. We had great jams the other week. So I feel a lot better. I feel like I got my finger on the pulse a little bit more. Hosted an awesome open mic out at the brewery the other day. If anyone in Hamilton is listening, every last Thursday of the month, we're going to start doing these open mics at the brewery. So come on down. I think it's usually like 6 to 9 kind of thing, or 6:30 to 8:30 or something like that. But, you know, come one, come all, bring your instrument and jam. So again, I feel like I got my finger on the pulse a little bit more. I feel a little bit more connected to some music and getting through some of that catharsis. But again, you know, I don't know if it's just the time of year, but, you know, people were just not feeling super groovy, you know, at work. And it's kind of like, you know, I'm a team player. I'm a huge team player. My God, it maybe to a fault. I don't know if it's half my Eastern European background and the way my grandmother helped raise me, which was very much like as if we were living in fucking Soviet Russia. Sometimes it was like, you know, sometimes you got to do shit for the greater good, essentially. You know, sometimes you got to fucking just eat shit sometimes, and sometimes it's going to be all right. But, and then just being on teams, like I know listening to the coach, whatever they say goes. And yeah, maybe if you look at certain things analytically, it doesn't work. But when it comes to a team atmosphere, you got to trust the coach's decision. And I feel sometimes at work, the favorite thing for everyone to do is to question the boss's decisions. And, you know, again, it's not like mutiny. It's not like people are fucking tripping. But again, some people like to disagree or just not completely go along with what the boss says. But I feel like as a team, there's got to be sacrifice. There's got to be a way that we can all work together. And I find that sometimes that's really tough. And, you know, there was just something mentioned really early where it was like, you know, if we don't do this, we might not necessarily survive as a brewery. And it's like, you know, maybe that was like somewhat of a bit of a wake-up call. I don't think we're on the fucking ropes or anything, but at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, maybe that's just one more kick in the pants, you know. Just, you know, I've heard a few people really say, I think it would be cool to go for this school thing, so I really think I need to start looking into it a little bit more. And again, if U of T is doing a program, like, my God, that's awesome. So anyway, that's kind of, you know, where my head's been at. It's, you know, it's here and there. And, you know, it's daunting. I'm scared. I know it's going to take a long time, probably going to take a lot of money, but, you know, it's something that, you know, I really want. Not that I don't feel fulfilled. Don't get me wrong, but I've always kind of felt a little bit wary, whatever, about doing the sales kind of thing. You know, it kind of scared the shit out of me when I was doing personal training. It was hard as fuck. I've been having a great time with it lately. I think I have a very different approach about it. And I think it's great. I think, again, it's just one of those things where, you know, I think Jim Carrey said, I don't know if this is his actual quote, but he said anxiety and depression are your body's way of saying that, you're done playing that role. Your avatar's done playing that role for the time. I don't know what the exact quote was. And again, not that I'm feeling depressed and anxious, super heavy, crazy, like down really hard, bad. But again, just certain feelings where I feel like maybe down the road, I might start feeling kind of certain feelings of burnout or whatever, which I do not ever want to feel again. And just have to be wary of. But at the same time, I really want to help people. I love talking through. There's always been something that I like to do and want to help people and want people to feel better about themselves, because again, we're all mirrors of each other, and you are me and I am you, and I want to heal you, because in healing you, I'm healing myself, and we're healing each other. And I think psychedelic medicine has really powerful effects, and I think harnessing that in a consciously like mindful way, if it's that way, just again trying to bridge that gap a little bit more between science and faith, and science and spirituality, because I think it's going to be a really interesting kind of mix where essentially these psychedelic therapists will kind of be like this modern shaman in a sense. So again, I feel it might be even hard to not have a practice without, paying somewhat homage to some of these older techniques. So anyway, I'm going to keep looking into it. I'm going to keep plugging away. I'm going to keep doing my thing, keep doing my Sober-tober. Had a fucking great class over at De La Soul Yoga Studios. Shout out Katie again. Anna Lee, I think, was the instructor. I remember because that's from the band song, The Weight. So she was great, and it was a great class. I felt better after. It's funny, I've talked about yoga already in one of the podcasts. Go check it out if you haven't. Honestly, like, your skin kind of feels better. It's hot yoga too, so you just sweat your bag, but you just feel like kind of toxins come out and shit, and like all types of fun, let alone stretching and getting after it, and you feel really good. So anyway, thank you for listening. I love all you. Thank you again. Thank you for coming on and spending some time with me. One thing I ask you, just please tell a friend about the podcast. Like, share, do all that other fun stuff. But please, just tell your friends. Give us a great rating. Hit the bell down below if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe. Tell your friends. We'll double the podcast overnight. I love you guys. We'll talk soon. Thanks so much. Peace.